Wicked at Lagoon is a very, very, very interesting roller coaster. It's a totally whack ride experience, which is why I think it's worth talking about. This ride has a lot of really good things and it has a couple bad things, so it's a pretty mixed bag of an attraction, but it's a really interesting ride experience. So let's dig in. This ride is basically a parking lot coaster, so you can see it when you walk into Lagoon. It really draws your eye with the yellow support column for the top hat. It looks really interesting, but the rest of the layout has gray supports, which is honestly kind of boring in my opinion. But the green track does look really, really good. I love the entrance sign for this attraction. It looks really cool. It also has a water element towards the base of it, which I didn't know was there before I got to Lagoon. So that's just really, really cool. I really like it. It adds a different dynamic than like 99% of entrance signs out there. Plus it matches the top hat, which is really cool. So the station setup is pretty interesting. If you didn't know, Wicked is a really weird ride because it has like booster seats. So for smaller guests who don't meet the height requirement, they can still ride, but they have to ride with a booster seat. So the ops just put in the booster seat, they sit the guests down, they lock the restraint, and then they send them on their way. And then when they return, they take the booster seat out and it's available for guests of all other heights who have the minimum height requirement, obviously. So that's really interesting. It's something I've never seen on anything else before, so that's just really bizarre. Plus, the manufacturer of this ride is Zero, and I know them as the manufacturer of Jaguar because I am a Southern California local, and that's like the highest profile thing that they've done in this area. So to see the builder of Jaguar make a full-scale thrill ride was actually really interesting for me because I've been riding Jaguar for years. So to see like Jaguar grown up into a big boy thrill ride was really interesting for me. So the restraints on this attraction are pretty interesting. Like on paper, it should be like a clamshell, like a B&M clamshell, but it's a lot bulkier than the B&M clamshells. It's kind of like a massive plate that kind of just sits on your thighs. So I didn't think the lap bar itself was uncomfortable. My problem with the restraints are the shin guards. So Cannibal has very similar restraints to this attraction, like very bulky, like almost plate-like clamshell restraints. And that ride also has a lap bar. The one on Wicked is much, much closer to your legs, and I think it's harder. Like it's a hard plastic on Wicked. The material on Cannibal might be softer. My legs never came in contact with those shin guards though, so don't really remember. But that is a big downside about Wicked. Shin guards have to be like the dumbest restraints out there. I never like when I see them on a roller coaster. Obviously, I never like mention them in a review video if they don't touch my legs, but the ones on Wicked do. When you're sitting down in the station though, it's not like completely claustrophobic, like your legs still have room to breathe, but throughout the ride experience, your legs are going to get jostled around and it might hurt a little bit. So after you're dispatched, you're going to roll into a left turn, and then you're going to turn straight into the launch. So this is a vertical launch, and I've never been on anything like this ever. It's a really, really interesting sensation. As I mentioned, one of my home parks is Knott's Berry Farm, so I'm very familiar with hang time. And on that ride, it's obviously a traditional lift hill, but you feel like you're falling out because the seats are tilted back. And honestly, I feel like that's how this sensation is. Like it feels like you're falling out, but the force of being pushed up is like sustaining you in that position. So it's a really interesting sensation. A few people have described it as like a rocket launch. Like this is as close as we can get to getting launched into space, like that feeling. And I think that's kind of funny. I wouldn't say it's quite that powerful, or I guess I've never been to space, so I guess it's not as powerful as what I would imagine being launched into space is like, but it's still a really interesting sensation. It's really awesome. It's a spectacular launch, and I'm excited to see if any future roller coasters have a vertical launch. Hopefully Intamin can pull through with that. Despite how interesting the vertical launch itself is, I don't want to gloss over the fact that the initial kick at the base of the hill is actually really solid. Like it's a solid pop that'll just shove you back in your seat before you launch up into the top hat itself. And then on my first ride, when I reached the crest of the top hat, it like blew me away how powerful that airtime was. Like that really chucks you out of your seat. It's a really solid moment. It'll just throw you up. The thing is that it's not sustained. So you get chucked out of your seat, and then you land as the ride vehicle is cresting the element. So right before you dive down, like there's a split second where you're in your seat and you're like at the exact top height of Wicked, which is pretty cool. And then you start the vertical descent like pretty much immediately, and that'll throw you out of your seat again. The thing about the vertical drop is that it doesn't keep you out of your seat. I think you land like about halfway back down the drop. So it's a really interesting sensation, but I can't help but to think that it would have been way cooler if it kept you out of your seat like all the way over the top hat. Like if that launch was just a little bit more powerful and then you took the top hat with a little more speed, it could be really cool. Speaking of that, it's kind of funny how many rollback warnings were there for Wicked. I never saw the ride rollback with my own eyes, but I did see a couple delays where they like went out into the turn area. They like stopped operation and they walked out there to check on the guests. So I'm not sure if it rolled back while I was in line or not. I'm not sure if that's something that happens frequently, but it was pretty interesting. So this tower, the forces that you feel are just absolutely spectacular. It's a really, really interesting moment. After that, you're going to go over a speed hill, and honestly, this speed hill blew me away. Like, it's a really solid pop of airtime. I even walked away saying that I think it's better than the speed hill on a lot of RMC roller coasters. A bunch of RMCs have a tiny bunny hop after their big drop. Like, I think of Twisted Colossus, Twisted Timbers, or even Steel Vengeance. I would say that the one on Wicked is better than all of them, which is actually pretty interesting. Like, obviously, it's not that sustained, but it's a really strong pop. And I think the bunny hills on RMCs are a little overrated. So this one gives you a good dose of airtime as you fly right over it. Obviously, all the airtime moments on Wicked are not that sustained. I really prefer sustained airtime, so that's kind of a shame. But they're still very, very impressive, so I don't mean to diminish that. Another big surprise is that I actually like this bunny hill on Wicked more than I like the step down on Cannibal. I feel like that step down on that attraction is really disappointing, while the speed hill on Wicked really blew me away. So I walked away preferring the speed hill on Wicked over the step down on Cannibal. So after that hill, you're going to turn up into an overbank. This element does pretty much nothing. Like it just turns the train around. You don't get that many forces because it's pretty high off the ground, and that'll throw you into the roll on this attraction. And this, just like the top hat, is a very, very, very interesting moment. Just look at the profiling of this roll. It's whack. So it looks like you crest into the roll and you crest out of it at one speed, but the top of the hill decides to be way tighter than the rest of the element. So on ride, you really feel that. Like, it inverts really quickly. It's kind of crazy. Honestly, I walked away with mixed emotions about this moment because it's really cool. Because you're moving pretty slow through the roll, but the profiling just takes the roll so quickly. So it's just really interesting. It's like Zero built the first half of the ride up to the overbank, and then they built the second half from the mid-course brake run, and then they used autocomplete to complete the top of the roll. It's just really weird. Like, you just look at this roll. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. So this will be a big moment where your shin will hit the shin guard, which is a major, major downside, because that does cause a bit of pain. However, the hang time that you get here is like absolutely wild. It's really, really fun. But that being said though, because it's a little shaky and because I didn't want my shins to hit the shin guards, I never felt like comfortable enough to put my hands up during this element. So I was always holding on to the restraint rolling through here. Like, it's just an absolutely wild inversion that you have to experience to understand. Like, it's kind of hard to put into words because you get crazy hang time because you take it so slowly, but the profiling makes you flip around so quickly. So it's kind of like, it contradicts itself, but it's just really interesting. It's really weird. It's just an awesome moment. And even after like 11 rides on Wicked, I still find it hard to describe how it feels, you know? So this is a really unique inversion that you have to ride. So this and the top hat combine for the best parts of Wicked. Like, it's just super interesting, and it's a fascinating ride that you have to try out. So right after that inversion, which is the only inversion on the attraction, unfortunately, you curve up into the mid-course brake run. And this is pretty much where the ride dies. So it has a super interesting first half. You go down into the second half and there's not much there. So the ride basically turns into Mystery Mine. The drop off of the mid-course has zero airtime, front or back. And then you curve into two overbanks, which basically give you nothing. You have like an S turn and then a turnaround. You go under a tunnel and then you hit the brake run. So it's kind of a shame. Because the roll on Wicked is so interesting, I really wish that Zero had the guts to have a second inversion on this attraction. Like, I feel like if the second half was just one more inversion, like a corkscrew and then a turnaround and then the brakes, I feel like Zero would have a really strong coaster. But because they just fumbled the bag with the second half, this ride just isn't as good as it could have been. And another thing that I really have to mention is that the second half really marks the point where the shin guards become a major problem, because the rattling on the ride becomes a major issue in the second half. Like, those horseshoe turns, like, they're visually interesting, but like on ride, they're not very fun. They're not forceful at all, and it's just a bunch of rattling. So it's just like you have to do your best to keep your shins in place so they don't hit the shin guard, which is kind of a shame. But this could have been one of the most fascinating roller coasters of all time. But Zero blew it, just like Matt Ryan. The only thing that's like relatively interesting about the second half is that when you go through that tunnel, if like someone is screaming on your ride vehicle, that noise is reflected back at you, so that's like a really interesting dynamic to have. And then another thing is when you hit the brake run, you come to a really smooth stop, which I greatly appreciate, especially since Lagoon's Wild Mouse, which is right next door, that ride stops on a dime, and it hurts a lot. I got punched in the gut by that ride's restraint, so be aware of that. So I greatly appreciate that both Wicked and Cannibal have really smooth stops. Anyway, when you're sitting on the brake run waiting for the ride vehicle in front of you to dispatch, the restraints will unlock like one click. So I didn't find the lap bars to be uncomfortable, it was just the shin guard. So I still appreciate that, but it's kind of unique that it unlocks, because the major ride that I've heard that does this is Sky Rush at Hershey Park, which I have yet to ride. And another thing is that over my 3 days at Lagoon, I saw them use both of their loading gates, so they can load 2 trains at once, and they can also only load 1 train at once. Obviously, it's more efficient to load 2 trains at once, but I saw them doing both throughout my 3-day visit to Lagoon. And that pretty much wraps up your Wicked ride experience. I walked away with mixed emotions, obviously, but I ranked it as my second favorite ride at Lagoon. Just like Primordial, this ride is carried by one element, and for Wicked, it is the first element with the vertical launch and the top hat itself. Obviously, the roll is really interesting, so that adds a much needed supporting element to the attraction, but I just wish it had like 1 or 2 more, you know? Like, the hang time on the roll is absolutely wild. So if Zero threw in a corkscrew like the one on Monster, I feel like they could have hit a home run with Wicked. But it's just not quite there, in my opinion. So what do you think about this attraction? Do you like it more than me? Do you like it less than me? Please let me know in the comments below. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will catch you later.